Hey, welcome back. And if you're new here, welcome to my channel. My name's Christina Kent, and I'm a fine artist based out of San Francisco. And in this video, I wanted to talk about something that I think is an issue that's common to a lot of artists and writers and people in kind of any creative field. And that is how to get started on a big creative project, particularly for us painters, how to face that blank canvas. And even in my own practice, like I've done hundreds of paintings now, but still, when I see a large blank canvas, I can feel really intimidating. There's just something about that white, pristine canvas that looks so nice and beautiful. And it immediately gets me feeling nervous, feeling those feelings of fear. And sometimes I can find myself actually taking a long time to get started, even if I'm really excited about my idea, even if I think it's going to be great, even if I know I've done so many paintings in the past and many of them have turned out really well, I still look at each new blank canvas and I start to feel nervous. So in this video, I wanted to talk about some of the things that I like to do to help myself get started and kind of overcome that initial inertia when I'm about to start a new project. What are the things that I like to do? Well, the first thing that I like to think about is I think it's important to recognize that this fear of starting, this feeling of nervousness when you're about to start something, it's totally normal. Like, I think when I was younger, I thought that maybe someday I would get to the point where I was more experienced and at some point this fear would just go away and I wouldn't be afraid anymore. But that's not the case, especially because as I've grown as an artist, my projects have become more and more ambitious over time. In my case in particular, I've gone to larger and larger scale canvases. And so for me, each time I go to one of these large canvases, each time I kind of step up in the size of the painting that I'm working on, that same feeling of nervousness comes back. And so while in the past I would feel that fear and I would let it hold me back, now when I feel the fear, I think, okay, this is normal. This is just part of the process. And this kind of, in a way, I almost embrace it because I feel like this is my mind and my body kind of giving me energy, giving me excitement, kind of getting me ready for this new creative project. Because I feel like with fear, there is some energy. There is, like with nervousness, it is sort of an energetic feeling. And I actually think that's good when we're starting something big and something new. We want to be energized. We want to be motivated. So the first thing that I like to do when I'm looking at the blank canvas is I remind myself that it's normal to be afraid. Fear is not a sign that you should stop. Oftentimes, fear is a sign that you should move forward. So I recognize the fear, I say, okay, I see you, and I thank the fear for the energy that it's giving me, for how it's helping to prepare me for this new project. Once I've recognized the fear, what do I do next to actually get started? And this can be very difficult, but I think that once you figure out a few steps, it gets so much easier. So in the past, what I would do is I would put the canvas on my easel and I would tell myself, okay, I'm gonna make a painting. So obviously, as you may understand if you've tried to do this before, this can be a point where you just want to stop. Because if you look at a blank canvas and then you try to imagine the final painting that you'll have at the end of it, that just seems like this huge task. It's extremely intimidating to say, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to make a painting. So instead, I don't do that. What I do is I break my process into small steps. So rather than sitting down and saying, I'm going to make a painting, I sit down and think, okay, what is the next small step that's going to get me closer to realizing this idea? So how does that look for my process? The first step I usually do is I tone the canvas. This is when I take a thin layer of some neutral color, usually like a brown or an orange, some warm color. I thin it out with Gamsol, and then I apply that to the surface. This accomplishes two things. It gets me started on the painting in a very simple way, and also it takes away that pristine white canvas. So now I've already put a layer of paint on it. The canvas has already been painted, it already has some paint on it, so I don't feel as nervous about making that first brush stroke. So that's the first thing I do. And this is a really simple, easy step. It doesn't take much brain power. I do basically the same color every time and just apply a uniform layer. And already I feel a little productive. I feel like I've made some progress towards the painting that I want to make. Once I've done my first toning of the canvas, or once I've toned the canvas, then I go on to the next small step. And for me, that involves doing a simple monochromatic underpainting, marking where the light and dark shapes are. So this is kind of like doing a value study or a notan, which I've talked about in other videos, but I like to try to have basically just a very simple sketch of the main dark and light shapes of the painting that I add on top of this toned layer. So I usually also do this in a brown, and here I'm just focusing on the light and dark shapes, and it's just the underpainting, so I'm not trying to get it perfect or anything like that. So I think that by doing this underpainting and marking out where the light and dark shapes are, and by not worrying about color, I have another fairly simple step that I can follow in my painting process. Then, if I'm still feeling nervous, which often happens after I've done the underpainting, I can still feel nervous to actually start adding the paint to the canvas. So then what do? Once I've done the toning of the canvas and then I've done the underpainting, then if I'm still feeling nervous about applying color, I will pre-mix colors that I see in my reference image. So I'm not applying any paint to the canvas. I'm just working on my palette, looking at my reference image, and then mixing up batches of color that I see in the reference image. So that when I do go to the painting process, then it's really easy. I already have a lot of my colors pre-mixed. I don't have to think about both mixing and painting at the same time. I find that it's a lot easier when I can separate those two stages into separate steps. And then sometimes even then, I still feel nervous about actually putting paint to the canvas. So I do another simple step where I say, okay, I'm just gonna put a light layer of color for the basic colors that I see in my reference image. So maybe if I have a patch of grass, I'll just use this light green that I've already mixed, and I'll just put a thin layer of color on that whole shape of the grass. Or if I have, say I'm doing a still life, then say a still life of lemons, maybe I would put a thin layer of color for the part of the lemon that's in the light and a thin layer for the part of the lemon that's in the shadow. So I'm already starting to mark out the basic colors on the canvas so that later when I want to go put in thicker paint and when I want to refine it, I already almost have these guidelines that I've set for myself. So these are the steps that I like to go through when I'm feeling nervous about starting a painting. It's all about breaking the painting up into these small steps, and by the time I've gone through all of these steps and gotten into the messy middle of the painting, which for me is often the trickiest part where I have to make a lot of decisions, I've already built up all of this momentum and I'm already kind of in the thick of it, so I usually feel motivated to keep going. And this idea of breaking the painting process up into small steps, it ties to something that I've read a lot about in productivity literature, which is this idea of the 5-minute rule. It's the idea that getting started on projects is often the hardest part. There's all of this inertia to move from not working on something to working on something. And there's this theory that if you just start spending 5 minutes on the thing, if you just get started, then that'll start building up momentum so that you can keep going. So according to the 5-minute rule, you would make a few tasks for yourself, a few very simple, basic tasks that last just 5 minutes to get you to start working on a project. And the idea is that once those 5 minutes are over, you're already started. You've already gotten over that initial inertia, and so it's much easier to keep going. So this is kind of what I'm doing when I'm toning the canvas or when I'm starting the underpainting. I'm working on these really small tasks that seem very easy, that seem really manageable. And the thing is, they get me going, they get me started so that I can continue even after I get into the more difficult parts. I think a big painting can seem really difficult and intimidating, but if we remember, it's just a bunch of brushstrokes, one after another after another. And when we break it down into these small steps, it becomes much more manageable. So these are the small steps that work for me when I'm trying to get started on a painting. If you have a big creative project that you'd like to work on, but you're feeling a lot of this inertia, let me know about the project in the comments below and tell me the first few small steps you can do to get yourself going. And then go do it, get started. And when you do, I bet you'll realize it's not as scary as you thought it would be. Anyway, that's all I have for today. I hope you liked this video and found it helpful. If you did, be sure to like, comment, subscribe to my channel. All of these things really help me out. And if you do like these videos, be sure to join my Patreon. I don't have any regular sponsors for this channel, so all these videos are supported by people just like you through my Patreon. So if you like my art, if you like my videos, and you want to help me make more, check out my Patreon at the link. And as always, a huge shout out to those who already support me on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for supporting this channel and making these videos happen. That's all I have for today. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.